Back in the book of Esther. This is our summer series. We're going through this amazing story in the Old Testament together, and we're going a couple of chapters at a time each Sunday, and we're diving into all that God has to say to us from this book of the Bible. With it, we've also got a reading plan, an optional add-on, a reading plan. If you want to follow along with it yourselves, there it is. That is the reading plan. If you want to go through it with us during the week, you can go Monday through to Friday. It's about 5 minutes a day, if that. It's just a little bit of reading so that you read it all ready for Sunday. So it's a little starter to the main course, which is the Sunday sermon. But if you want to do that, you'll get loads out of it. I've had a few people come to me to say that they've been getting so much out of going through it in the week themselves and then coming along on Sunday. So why not give it a go? But this morning, we are going to get into the next couple of chapters of Esther, chapters 3 and 4. But before we do, I want to ask you a question. Where are you positioned? That's my question for you this morning. Where are you positioned? Last week, we looked at the idea that God is working in everything and that God positions everyone. So that means that you have been positioned by God. A bit like a grandmaster playing chess, who positions all their pieces in exactly the right place. So my question to you is, where has God positioned you? Where has he placed you? What opportunities has he given to you? What influence have you got over other people? These are the questions I'd like you to get thinking about, because they're going to become very relevant for the story today from the book of Esther. Because Esther is going to be faced with some very similar questions. She's going to have to make a very tough decision. And she's got to know where God has placed her and for what reason. And I believe that looking into her example this morning, we can use the same truths that Esther finds out to make tough decisions ourselves, and to use the positions we've got for God. So let me give you a super quick recap of the story from last week. So last week we read through chapters 1 and 2, and we were introduced to three main characters. We had King Xerxes, didn't we? He is the king of the Persian Empire, very powerful. It was like the Roman Empire, but a bit before that. And we got introduced to him when he got rid of his wife in this drunken event where he tried to parade around everyone. She said no, all the power to her, and she left. And he banished her. Next we have Esther, a Jewish girl who grew up without parents, but she was raised by her cousin. And she entered the king's beauty contest to get a new queen. And she won. And now she lives in the palace with the king, living a lavish new life, sitting on those gold sofas that don't sound very comfortable, but oh boy, do they feel rich. Finally, we've got Esther's cousin, Mordecai. He was the one who raised her. We haven't heard too much about Mordecai so far. We just had one incident where he overheard a plot where people were trying to kill the king, and he told the king about it. They got caught, and he saved the king's life. So we have Esther, King Xerxes, and Mordecai. In chapter 3, we're now going to meet our fourth and final main character by the name of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. And yes, I did spend 10 minutes practicing that in the mirror this morning. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. What a name that is. You thought your name was hard to pronounce. But now we will exclusively refer to him as Haman, and Haman alone. A bit like, one name, Madonna. So, chapter 3. It tells us that Haman was one of King Xerxes' officials. He was one of the officials in his government. And after Esther becomes queen, Haman is elevated through the government. He has a low position, and then the king promotes him and promotes him and promotes him, all the way to being basically the top noble in all of the land. And it even says a decree was made so that people had to bow down when Haman entered a room. I mean, I don't know if Haman had pushed for that law himself or if King Xerxes had made it, but anyone with their own law saying people have to bow down when they come near you is going to be a nasty piece of work, aren't they? So the trouble begins when Haman walks by Mordecai. Now Mordecai, being a Jew, he's one of God's people, and so he decides he's not going to bow down to Haman with his own special law. which is quite a good policy, by the way. When you worship an all-powerful, all-loving, mighty God, it's a good idea not to bow down to other gods or other humans. So Mordecai didn't bow down. And this really got under Haman's skin. I mean, you can imagine, he's probably quite a prideful guy. It really got under his skin. And so he went home and he started plotting. Now, you and me, when someone offends us, we go home, we have a little rant to our spouse or to whoever will listen, our pillow if it needs to be. And we have a little rant and then we move on. Haman went home and started plotting how to murder Mordecai. And not only Mordecai, but the complete genocide of all his people. If you can't tell already, he's insane. There's a screw loose somewhere. To decide on a month, he decided to cast lots, which basically means roll a dice. He decided on a month, he landed on 12, so he decided the 12th month, he's going to try and get them all killed. So he goes to the king, he offers him this huge amount of silver, and he convinces him to pass a law saying that on the 12th month of the year, that will be December for us, all the Jews must be killed. The king doesn't even take the silver, he just says yes. He says yes to Haman's evil plan. He agrees, and he gives Haman his signet ring, which is how you were to make a law. If something was stamped with the king's signet ring, that meant it was law and it was going to happen, whether you like it or not. So Haman brings together all the officials, all the nobles of the Persian Empire, and he tells them the new law, that on the 12th month, everyone is to go and attack the Jews, and they are to rob them of all they've got. This is what Haman says. Every Jew is to be targeted and killed, young and old, women and children. Everything they own is to be stolen. And if this is starting to sound familiar, you'd be right, because this is exactly what Hitler and the Nazis did during the Holocaust, isn't it? Just like the Holocaust, this law meant mass-scale genocide of the Jewish people on a level never seen before. Historians estimate there were probably millions of Jews living in the Persian Empire. And Haman has just passed a law, with the king's full permission, ordering people to attack them, simply because one man injured his pride. Haman is beyond evil. So when the news about this law gets announced in the city of Susa, as you could imagine, everyone is shocked. Everyone is just shocked. Even the non-Jews are completely bewildered at such an evil law. And of course, Mordecai is devastated. He tears his clothes and puts on sackcloth and ashes, which is an old ancient way of expressing mourning. A bit like how we wear black to a funeral. They would clothe themselves in sackcloth and ashes. And so Esther didn't know what had happened. Esther was up in the palace and she didn't realize that this law condemning her people to death had just been passed. So when she looks out to the courtyard and sees Mordecai in mourning in sackcloth and ashes, she wonders, what on earth is going on? What has happened to Mordecai? So she sends one of her attendants to go out and talk to Mordecai. Mordecai told the attendant everything about the silver Haman had offered, the new law that had been approved, and he sent back a desperate plea to Esther to go and beg the king for mercy for her people. So Esther's world has just come crashing down. So far, she's been living the dream. She's just won a whirlwind beauty contest. She started living in the palace, probably eats whatever she wants to, lives however she wants to. But now her husband, the king, has just signed her people's death warrant. What is she going to do? Now, she could try and intervene like Mordecai has asked her to, but it's not as simple as just going up to the king and asking him, please, can you spare my people? There's actually a lot more peril, and it's a lot more scary than that. In those days, in the Persian Empire, just to talk to the king, you had to risk your life. The way it worked was that anyone who approached him uninvited, even the queen, would be sentenced to death automatically. And so the only way you could approach him and live is if the king spared your life by raising his golden scepter. If you went in front of the king and he raised his golden scepter, he would spare your life, you'd be fine, you could talk to him. If he didn't, you'd be taken off to be killed. That's what we're dealing with here. And then she'd have to tell him that he'd made a mistake about this law. And for those of us who were here last week, do we remember what happened the last time when the queen said no to the king? He passed a whole law banishing her from his presence. This is a king who banishes his own wife for disobeying her. Assuming she survives approaching him, which is not guaranteed, assuming he'll even listen to him, she would then have to plea for him to change his mind. So this is a very tough task that Mordecai has given her. Very tough. And there's one detail that makes the decision even harder. No one actually knows that Esther's Jewish. She didn't actually tell anyone during the beauty contest that she was a Jew. So there's probably, in her mind, there's probably a small chance, a little voice saying, there's a small chance that you might survive this. If you say nothing, you might be able to get away with it and carry on as queen. What would you do in her shoes? What decision would you make? It's a tough one, isn't it? It's not an easy one at all. Would you say anything? Would you risk everything to speak up for your people? Or would you keep quiet and try and survive? Esther sends back a message to Mordecai, and she explains how risky it's going to be. This is what she says to Mordecai, and it will come up on the screen as we read through it. This is what Mordecai says in response to Esther after she announces the problem. Mordecai says this back to Esther to encourage her. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Yes, Esther is facing the biggest decision of her life. Yes, she has to stand up to her husband who has just signed her death warrant. Yes, she might die in the process. But Mordecai knows that God is calling Esther to be bold. God is calling her to stand up for what's right and to be bold to the king. Mordecai clearly knows God very well, because in this short little section, he gives some incredible truths about God that will give Esther all the confidence she needs. And these same truths that we're about to go into will give you the same confidence that God will do everything that you need to be bold for him at pivotal moments like this. So the first truth that Mordecai reveals in this statement is that God will save his people. If Mordecai knows anything about the Lord his God, he knows that God will save his people. God will not stand by while an evil leader attempts to kill them all. Our God is a God of rescue, a God who saves. He delivered his people out of slavery in Egypt. He saved Daniel while he was in the lion's den. He saved them countless times from other nations. When they turned to him, he would rescue them. Psalm chapter 68, verse 20, throw it up on the screen. Our God is a God who saves. From the sovereign Lord comes escape from death. I wonder if you know this to be true this morning. I wonder if you know this for yourself, that our God is a God who saves. He can save you. He can rescue you. He can pull you out of whatever pit you find yourself in, and he can set your feet on solid ground. Our problems might look a little bit different from the book of Esther. In the book of Esther, it's an evil guy called Haman trying to kill them. But in our lives, our problems might be a little bit different. And actually, the problem that a lot of us face, in fact, all of us face, is our own wrongdoing. In the book of Esther, Haman was the one trying to kill God's people. In our day and age, and throughout all of history, our wrongdoing is the thing that is leading us towards death. But from the sovereign Lord comes escape from death. The good news that we experience today as Christians is that God has saved us from death. God sent his one and only Son to come to earth to die on the cross for us. You might be thinking, how is my own sin going to be taken away from me? How can my own wrongdoing how can I be saved from it if it condemns me to death? But the thing is that God sent his son to take our wrongdoing that was on us, to lift it off of us and to put it onto his son. And that's how he saved us. So that whoever believes in Jesus can experience this forgiveness, where God takes our wrongdoing off of us and puts them on to Jesus. In doing so, he gave us the chance to have all our wrongdoing forgiven and to experience new life in Jesus' name. All we have to do is to believe in him, to receive this new life. And if you haven't done that, I would recommend that beyond anything else. That is the thing that will change your life, is putting your trust in Jesus. Our God is a God who saves. Truth number 2, God has positioned Esther. God has positioned Esther. Mordecai recognized the major truth that we looked at last week, which is that God positions his people. He positions you and me. He positioned Esther to be exactly where he wanted her. You know the phrase, right place, right time? Well, someone happened to be in the right place at the right time. And in fact, I've got an example for you of this being true, about the positioning that can sometimes happen in this life. There's an incredible example of right place, right time that happened back in history, back in the Cold War in 1983. And there was a Russian guy by the name of Stanislav Petrov. We've got some great names this morning. And he worked at the Soviet Nuclear Command Center in a place called Oko. And on the 26th of September 1983, he was on duty, and his job was to manage the Soviets' early warning nuclear missile system. So his job was basically to detect early warnings of nuclear missiles being fired into the Soviet Union. So normally, it was a pretty unexciting job. He would just sit there, stare at the radar, check that nothing was happening, job done. But on the 26th of September, the system suddenly started warning Petrov that a nuclear missile had been launched from the US, followed up by another 4 missiles coming in. So Petrov was now sitting there staring the prospect of nuclear war straight in the face. But something didn't quite feel right to him. There were a couple of reasons, he said in later interviews, there were a couple of reasons that came to mind. First of all, this was a newer system that had been recently installed, and so he had his doubts about it. He used to be an engineer before joining the military, and so as an aviation engineer, he had his doubts about a new system. Secondly, all his instincts told him that if the US was going to send a nuclear strike, they would just send all of it at once. They would have total, like a big strike like that. They wouldn't just send 1 or maybe 5 so that the Soviets could retaliate. So Petrov was sitting there having to make the biggest decision of his life, perhaps the biggest decision of the 20th century, which was whether he warned the higher-ups that this was going on. He made the decision not to report it. And while almost all of his colleagues at the command center probably would have reported it and probably would have begun a nuclear war, Petrov's engineering background and his good judgment meant that he didn't report it and he decided to wait. Thankfully, for all of us here today and all of us back then, it was a false alarm. Thank goodness for that. The early warning system, what it actually detected was that there was this high up cloud in the area where they were looking at, and the sun was reflecting off it, and so the satellite detected an early warning and it sent the wrong message. Thank goodness that Petrov held his breath and decided to wait. Thank goodness he was in the right place at the right time. And you know, when I first read that story, I was convinced that God put Petrov there that day to make that decision, because not everyone would have done. But God engineers situations so that we are in the right place at the right time. Esther found herself in a very important position. She was the wife of the king. And as hard as it seemed, she was in the right place at the right time. And I think what Mordecai says is really powerful for Esther's situation. He says, "Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" no one was better positioned to speak to the king than Esther. The third truth that we want to cover this morning is that God has given you influence. God has given you influence. God's positioning is not just geographical, and it's not just being in the right place in the right time, but he also gives us influence over other people. I once met someone, random story, but I once met someone playing table tennis. I was with a few of my friends, and we went to a table tennis table that we knew about. And there was another friend there, and he introduced me to someone, and we started playing table tennis together. And I got to know him, and I got chatting to him. And then I didn't see him for like 6 months. Just met this one random person once I played table tennis one time. Didn't see him again for 6 months. It got to December of that year, and I was doing my shopping in Sainsbury's. And in fact, I think I've told this part of the story before. I was doing my shopping, and I got 2 big shopping bags full, all my shopping, some freezer stuff, some fridge stuff. And then some of my friends bumped into me when I came out of Sainsbury's. And they were like, "Oh, George, we're going to this carol service at church. Do you want to come? Do you want to come? It's an evening service." And I said, No, I do not. I've just got my shopping. I'm fine. I've had enough. I went this morning. I'm okay. But they were fortunately very, very persistent. And so they got me, they towed me, they almost dragged me with my shopping bags in my hand. And I went all the way to this carol service with all my freezer items that were slowly getting warmer. It was painful wearing my mind. But I sat down on this row with my friends for this carol service, put my shopping bags under my seat and that person's seat as well, whoever they were, and I have a seat next to me, and the whole place is basically rammed, but there's one free seat next to me. And lo and behold, who comes and sits next to me in that seat? It's the guy I played table tennis with about 6 months ago. And he came along to that Sunday with loads and loads of questions about God. And he was there to that carol service because he wanted to know more about Christianity and about this church. And he wanted to try and get back into it because he'd been a Christian a while ago. And so out of all the possibilities, he came and sat next to me, the guy he'd met 6 months ago, and we'd started a little relationship with. And so I was able to invite him to church the following Tuesday and then the following Sunday, and he came both times. And then from then on, he started coming to church, and he gave his life back to the Lord from that point onwards. How incredible was that? That's such an amazing situation where God just hits you with the right place, the right time, and we can use our influence for him. God has given Esther a great influence. He's also given you great influence. He's given you influence. Did you know that? You may not think that you've got influence, but you do. You don't have to be a pastor on a stage like this to have influence. You don't need to be a politician to have influence. You don't need to be a street preacher or set up your own charity or snowboard down Mount Everest to have influence, but you have it right now. All you have to do is look at how God has positioned you to see where your influence is. Where has God positioned you in your family? Where has God positioned you in your street? Where has God positioned you at work? What relationships has God put in your life where you have influence? Because people look at us. You know, if you're a teacher in front of a classroom of kids, you have a lot of influence over those kids. They will look at your every move. They won't just pay attention to your lessons, but they'll look at you and see how you act, see what you say. Do you have a wider family? You've got influence over that wider family. Even if you're the youngest of the young, and I'm not, I'm the oldest, I don't want to put my hand up, but even if you're the youngest sibling, one of 7, and you are right at the bottom, you have influence. You do. And God has given us influence for such purposes as this. God might have given you influence in that situation for such a time as this. Because God calls us to be bold. Let's say there's something not going right at work. There's something really wrong happening at work. And God has put you in that workplace. God might be calling you to be bold and to stand up for what's right in a particular situation. If something's wrong is happening, God might be calling you to be bold and to stand up for such a time as this. It's a big risk for Esther to take, to go to the king It could mean death. It could mean all manner of things. But Esther goes to the king, and Esther decides that she's going to do this. And listen to what Esther says. Esther sends this message back to Mordecai. He says, "Go gather all the Jews who are in Susa and hold a fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." How bold is that? What an incredible step of faith from Esther. That is the boldness that I want to have in my life for God. God calls each and every one of us to be bold, to use our influence for right, for goodness, for his purposes. We need to step up like Esther. Esther recognizes that she has been positioned, she has been given influence, and God is calling her to be bold. And she decides to go to the king and to speak to him. Now what happens? You'll have to come back next Sunday. You'll have to come back next Sunday. I've got to leave it on a cliffhanger. We've got to get you back in. You've got to keep coming. I'm sorry. I've got to do it for you. But I'll end with this. And do the worship team want to come back up? If we understand these truths about God, that God has positioned us intentionally, that God has given us all that we need, that allows us to be bold for him. Let me end with this final verse from 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Put it up on the screen, guys. It's the last verse. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 12. "Therefore, since we have such hope, we are very bold." If you struggle with boldness at all, if you struggle with being bold, it might be because you don't have enough hope. We can only be bold because we know that God is on our side. If God's not on our side, I am as timid as it gets. I'm running and hiding because I don't want to fight against God. But if we're on the side of God, we can be as bold as humanly possible. With the spirit God gave us, we can be as bold as a lion. Esther was bold because Jesus was with her. Jesus, God himself, was inside of Esther. And she was bold, so we can be bold in her, following her footsteps and in her example. As the band start playing, you guys can get playing. I want to give you 2 invitations this morning off the back of this story from Esther. The first one is about the first truth that Mordecai gave to Esther, which is that God saves his people. And I want to extend the opportunity to you to be saved by Jesus this morning. Jesus came down to die for us on the cross so that all of our sin could be taken off of us, and that we could have eternal life in heaven for free. Jesus died to forgive us from those sins, and he offers that forgiveness to everyone who wants it. All you've got to do is believe in the name of Jesus and ask for that forgiveness, and he will give it to you. Whatever you've done wrong in your life, you could be the worst of the worst, and Jesus can forgive you. So that's my first opportunity I want to give to you, is to respond to Jesus by accepting him into your life. Second is, if you want more boldness in your life, I want to give you the opportunity to come forward and to be prayed for. If you want to be bolder in the name of Jesus, if you want to use your influence that you have for goodness, for righteousness, for the kingdom of God, I want to invite you forward, and I would love to pray for you.